I'm Serban. I don't know if I should present myself again. Maybe. Okay. And we'll talk about building fancy UIs with UI5, which might be a surprise. You can actually do it. So about me, again, sorry for the guys who were already in the morning, but I have to present myself for the rest. So I'm a senior IT consultant at MSG, and I actually am a lead developer and architect, because for us, being a senior doesn't really mean anything. And I've worked with a lot of technologies along the way. So I started with ABAP, unfortunately. And after, I don't know, maybe 1 year and a half, 2 years, 1 year, something like that, of ABAP, I finally escaped the prison and I started working with HANA, and then with UI5, and now finally I stopped. I'm working currently with SCP. Who knows, maybe next year I will have another technology there. Okay, and another trivia. So this year, actually just this week, I got the confirmation that I was awarded SAP Developer Hero title. So I have a photo in Las Vegas with just the photo. No, I was not there, so it's a photo of my photo from there. But yeah, so at TechEd in Las Vegas, they have these banners with all the developer heroes. So yeah, that was the only thing that I got. But yeah. Okay, but today we will look at an app, so a real-life app, and it's an app that I actually got another award for. So it was the second place at UI5 Top 5. It's an annual competition or contest organized by SAP in which you submit your app. It has to be something new or innovative, and they make a top 5 basically. So I was second place, and there I got something really physical, which was a mug and a diploma basically. So at least there I got something that I can hold in my hand. Okay, and let's look a little at the app itself. So let's look what the app does. It's a very simple app. It's just a photo gallery, right? So this is built with UI5 for the people who work with UI5 normally. It might be a surprise, but this is actually UI5. Okay, so you have a landing page, right? You have a drop-down in which you can switch the language from English to Romanian. You can go through a sort of a feed, right, in which you see who what posted, and you can also browse all the posts, meaning all the photos, right? And it has a nice loading animation. So yeah, of course, this is just a static website, so I don't have a backend for it because I just want to showcase UI5 stuff. So there is no real backend. Okay, and it's built with custom controls, of course, because to build something like this in UI5, you have to know what you're doing, and you, of course, have to customize a lot. Okay, let me duplicate it, and let's go back. Okay, good. So, actually for this presentation, you don't need to know that much about web, because we will discuss a little about web, or about web development, so you don't need to have a lot of knowledge beforehand. So what we use in web development, of course, HTML. That's intermingled structure and data, let's say. So basically you have the data, meaning the content of the website, and also the styling and the way in which the website is organized. It's together. So there is no separation, it's mixed together. Then we have the CSS, which defines how it should look like, meaning what colors, spacing, stuff like that. So in the example that I showed you in the gallery app, actually there is a lot of CSS, right? Because the site looks pretty fancy. So there is a lot of CSS behind it. We will discuss what CSS it is. And then lastly, there is a little JavaScript. So that's actually code, right? This one, it's a markup language. So it's just some text and some tags. It's not really code. This one is just some rules. but this one really is code. So there you can write if, else, for, blah, blah. And here you have to handle user interaction. So meaning here you do something like form validation or communication with the web server, if there is one, and stuff like that, right? And maybe also build the UI dynamically. So for the people who submitted feedback using the feedback app, I used some JavaScript there to make the messages pop up when you write them. So I built UI somehow dynamically there. Okay. And basically, just to exemplify, this in this part, it's just HTML. There is no CSS. So there is an image loaded. There are some likes, comments, indicators. Another image here for the profile picture, a link towards the profile of the person, and the category, right, of the photo. And here it's with CSS. So basically, you can see that the image is rounded, the category is coming somehow above the image. Here we have a nice layout in which the comments are on one side and the likes on the other side. There are some icons, so heart and this comment bubble, right? And everything is in a box. So all this stuff is CSS, basically. There is some underlying HTML, which is this one, but this is the CSS which makes the site look nice and not like a shoe. Okay. UI5. So UI5 is an open source framework, which in my view is archaic, might be nice, a nice way of putting it. So it's a partially open source framework actually, because SAP said we want to contribute to open source, but not too much. So the charts and all the other stuff, all the generic UIs, so these auto-generated UIs, those are not in open source. And open source is basically the framework, so really the core, and the core controls. So mobile controls like input fields, tables, stuff like that. It's open source, but charts, more advanced graphs, stuff like that, those are for money, basically. Although you cannot buy them separately, so you have to buy something like HANA or an ABAP stack, and then you get UI5 built in. Okay, and I say that it's archaic. Why? Because, well, when they started working on it, a million years ago, 7, I think, they tried to use almost the most recent concepts, almost, because they were not really the most recent concepts, and they didn't really improve in the meanwhile. So they are using a very procedural style of doing stuff with XML views, which in web development is not really used. And yeah, let's say a very old way of thinking about. They also used a lot of jQuery, which is a library which was very popular in 2008, I guess, and now is fading away slowly because there everything is done procedurally. So you have to say for each button, you have to handle it, and so on. Okay, and they have other concepts that they are using that are not really the best. Okay, but the idea in UI5, it's pretty easy. The idea is that you have a hierarchy, so you can define a page, for example. Inside the page, you can have a toolbar. Inside the toolbar, you can have buttons. So there is a hierarchy of controls, something like this. Each control can have some properties, which can be strings, numbers, whatever, and can have several children. This will be, let's say, important later when we will see the live coding part, where I have to define stuff like this. Okay, so the idea would be that you can have several aggregations or several collections in which you can store child controls. So a toolbar, for example, can have one or more buttons and just one search field, right? If you think about the header toolbar, search field, and buttons. Okay, so this is about UI5, and how does it link to the other concepts that we already discussed? Well, UI5 tried to somehow abstract from the HTML. So they built these controls, and then each control has a function, this renderer function. Actually, it can be also an object, and it's responsible from transforming from the control itself, from the JavaScript object, to the HTML. So then basically, this kind of transformation is done by a renderer, right? This is something that we will use today, because we will define such a renderer. Okay? So just as an example, this is the UI5 representation of something. It's a list with 2 items and a group item, and this is what is generated, right? So we, as developers, write this stuff, and then behind the scenes, all this bullshit is generated. So basically, yeah, actually, I think I only included 1 item. So this item is all of this, basically. So it's very hard to understand what's happening here. Here it's a little simpler because you just look, it's a list, a standard list item, so 2 standard list items here. Fairly easy to work with, but if you have to debug then something more in depth, then you have to look at this, and this is not really that useful or not that easy to understand. Okay, now let's go to see the second concept. So for today, I'll show you a library that I built, because now, as opposed to 10 years ago, we are using different concepts in web development, right? So we try to move away from the old concepts of jQuery and so on, and to move to a more modern approach. UI5, of course, is not doing anything like this, but I'm talking about other developers, like, for example, Facebook developers. So what Facebook did was that they decided that it would be helpful to be able to write somehow HTML directly in JavaScript. So they found a type-safe way-ish of defining HTML inside JavaScript, and they use this in React. So React builds strongly upon this concept of HTML somehow embedded in JavaScript, and it's called JSX. So this basically is an extension for JavaScript which does this HTML embedded inside JavaScript. Okay, so it's a syntax extension, as I said, popularized by React, and the power comes from the fact that you can treat then HTML objects or tags as if they are expressions. So you can, you can just store them in variables, you can loop over stuff and generate JSX tags and so on. So it's very convenient in this way that you can just mingle JavaScript and HTML like they are the same thing. Okay, so for example, looking at a little code, so what's here, this is HTML. UL, it's an unnumbered list, so it's with dots, a list with dots, and this LE is a list item, right? So basically, and this part is a JavaScript array with a JavaScript call to the for each. So what would this do? It would generate a list which has 5 elements, A, B, C, D, and E, right? And this is the power of JSX and combined with JavaScript, because it allows you to do stuff like this, and this is just a regular expression that you can embed in other JavaScript code. How would we do it in something else, like in jQuery? We will need to build this string, like a string, to build the string of the list item, and then append it somehow manually to the HTML DOM, right? Okay. What's the, let's say, the problem? Well, in the past 10 years, so JavaScript is a scripting language. What does that mean? It's not compiled, right? Scripting languages normally are evaluated statement by statement by interpreters, so they just go through each row, basically, and just evaluate them. And compiled languages are somehow transformed into an executable, right? Well, in the past 10 years, people started trying out new things. And what they did, because browsers only know JavaScript, so most browsers only know JavaScript. So then what they did actually is that they created other languages that compile into JavaScript. So you write something like TypeScript, or there are a lot of languages that are generated from JavaScript, and those get compiled into JavaScript. For example, you could write modern JavaScript, like ECMA 6, or the newest standards, and in the end it could get generated or could get compiled into JavaScript that can run on Internet Explorer 8, for example, which is still used in a lot of companies. So, and this is the same thing that is used for JSX, because browsers do not know JSX. if you try to do something like this and just paste it in a browser, what would happen is that the browser would throw a syntax error, probably here, or if it's Internet Explorer, then also here, because it does not know const. Yeah, so it would throw a syntax exception, and you would not be able to run your code. If you use something to compile, then it would actually generate this, and this is what the browser would run, right? So this HTML is compiled into a create element statement, and that's what the browser executes. So actually, the browser does not execute this, but this. But the benefit is that you have to write this. So this is a lot easier for developers to see and understand, especially if you have a lot of statements or a lot of HTML. Right? This is easier to understand. If you look at it, you say, okay, it's a header with the class greeting, and which contains hello world. And here, yeah, you have to know what each parameter means, because you don't know, is this the tag, or maybe this is the tag? In this case, it's easy. But what if instead of hello world, we had h1? Then it would be h1, class name greeting, h1. So you don't know which is the tag, which is the content. It's a lot harder to understand this kind of thing. And this also doesn't scale at all. So if you have to write a big UI using something like this, it's impossible. It's not doable. I mean, it will not be maintainable. You could maybe write it, but then you will not understand anything. Okay. So let's talk a little about custom controls. So in UI5, we have a big repository, let's say, or a big catalog of controls. So SAP provides, I don't know, I think there are 200, maybe more controls, I don't remember, from input fields to, I don't know what kind of bubble chart. And basically, they thought from the beginning that they could not deliver everything. So there are things that you just don't have out of the box, and you have to develop by yourself. The colleagues who worked with me in the past know that at the beginning of UI5, or which worked really at the beginning of UI5, we did not have controls for most of the scenarios, so we did a lot of custom control development. Now, most of the stuff is done through generation, so the UIs are auto-generated, and there you don't really need that many custom controls, but you also don't have that much flexibility, right? So, I mean, all the UIs look mostly the same because they mostly use the same controls, so then it's also an advantage somehow for the users, but in other cases, it's a lot more difficult, right? If you have some complex scenario in which a built-in control cannot help you, you have to build a custom control. That's, yeah, there is no way around it. Okay, good. So we can define our own controls, and it's the same way in which SAP defines controls. So we don't use a different mechanism, basically. And rendering this HTML, so really writing the HTML in UI5 is very, very horrible. The problem is that UI5, to render this HTML, has to concatenate a lot of strings. So there is no nice syntax. You just have to concatenate strings and to make sure to escape stuff. And it's very error prone. So if you look at it, we'll show an example. It's impossible to understand what's happening there. The only way in which you can help yourself is to split into methods and have methods which have really nice names and a lot of comments, and then maybe you understand what's there. So, for example, in UI5, this is an example from their documentation. This is how they draw a square, right? And there are, I don't know, 10 lines of code to draw a square, and it's a little difficult to understand exactly what's happening. They just concatenate a lot of strings here in order to generate the square. Okay, and basically the alternative would be something like this, to have a div with the style and the text inside. So it's a lot easier to understand for a developer. He can look and see directly what the renderer does in a more declarative way. Okay, and we can actually do exactly that. I wrote a small plugin which does this compilation from JSX to UI5 compliant code. And basically Bubble, because I also wrote it here, Bubble is one of the options that you can use to compile JavaScript code. So if you ever want to do some kind of advanced JavaScript application, Bubble is a good way of doing this. Bubble also has a lot of built-in or pre-existing configurations that allow you to compile, for example, new JavaScript to horrible Internet Explorer JavaScript, right? So, or other scenarios like this, or JavaScript that is written for one specific browser to another specific browser. So it has a lot of plugins like this. And let's look how it looks like. So what's the difference? This is, let me zoom a little. Right, so this is a control which is defined with this library, right? And we can very fast see what's in it. There is a div, there is an icon, which is a world icon, so probably something like a globe. Then some text, and input field, which is hidden, which stores the selected key. And then there is a menu, and inside the menu we have several items. This is a select box, so a box on which you click an arrow and it drops down a list of items, right? Okay, let's see how it looks like after you compiled it. And I think I have to zoom out because I cannot show it at once in a single screen. Yeah, so this is the code. I will not go through it because I don't understand it, but basically it's a lot of stuff, and it's impossible for a developer to look and say, okay, is it a select box? I don't know, maybe. It could be. So this is the difference, right, between what SAP does, so this is exactly how SAP builds their controls, and how they could actually build their controls, meaning using something like JSX or something else. Actually here, 1.5 years ago, I was at a conference at SAP, and they were already looking at options to use not JSX, but something older, of course, SAP, but something from 6 or 7 years ago, handlebars, and to use that to generate, because they also hit into this problem. For a select box, it's very easy, but think about, for example, I don't know, there are some controls in UI5 that are very complicated, like there are some charts that are very complicated. There is this combination between chart and table, and those are rendered using this. Also, the table is very complicated, so the table has a lot of options in it. And how they do it, they just have methods. They have 100 methods for rendering a cell, for rendering the header, for rendering the lines, and yeah, this is the code that is written. Okay. Okay, good. So you might be wondering, why would you use JSX and not something else like SAP decided to use? Well, there is a wide support. So if you write something in JSX, you might actually just copy-paste it into a different framework. So for example, React has 90K stars on, had 90K stars on GitHub. Probably now it has something like 100K. I wrote these stats in Spring, so. Vue.js also uses it, and it also has 90K. Bubble is used to compile it, has 25K stars, and UI5 has 1.5K stars. So here SAP is in its own world in which nobody actually uses UI5, but they are not using the standards that other companies and other developers are using. React is the most popular UI framework today. So instead of using the same things, which actually they could have just gotten for free, because all the React stuff is open source and the JSX stuff is not part of React, it's a separate part. They decided to use their own mechanism. So, okay, and another cool thing is that you can actually check it at design time. What does this mean? Well, when you write all those horrible strings that SAP is writing, how do you test it? Well, you have to run it, because it's impossible to test it just by looking at it. If you use JSX, there is a way to check it at design time. So when you write the code, the IDE can tell you, okay, you forgot to close a bracket, you forgot to write I don't know what, or that attribute is mandatory. So these are things that you can speed up development with a lot. Okay, and of course, probably, in my view at least, it's the most flexible because you can use directly JavaScript expressions. You don't need a custom language like SAP is doing now with UI5 in XML templates, that they created their own kind of language in XML. You just use JavaScript, and everything that works in JavaScript will work in JSX. So that's, let's say, the beauty of it. Okay, and I'll do a live demo of this. Let's hope that it works. Okay, good. So I have my Visual Studio Code. I think I should make it a little bigger. Okay, is it okay? Can you see? Okay, good. So let me start my local development server. Basically, I have to compile on the fly the sources. So let's go to localhost. Yeah, so this is the site, the website I just showed you, but there is something missing. If we go to the browse section, the cards, so here in the live example, there were some cards with the photos and the category and the likes and so on. And now there are just some empty divs. You see that it's loading the divs, but it's nothing in there, right? Okay, so what's the problem? Well, I went in this card class, and I removed the content, right? So we just have, when we render, just now we render an empty div, right? We can see it's a div, and which is associated to that control. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, we can go here on the Semantic UI. This is a framework which I used for the CSS, so it looks nice. I did not design the site myself because I'm a developer, not a designer. So I just looked here and I found what card I liked the most, what example, and I just pressed here to see the code, and I basically copy-pasted the code in my editor, right? So here I have already the code prepared before, and we can check it out, if it also opens. Right, so this is a static card, just HTML, no JavaScript, but also with CSS. So this is how we want it to look like, right? Just HTML, and there is no UI5 concept here yet. So how do we move this to UI5? Well, it's pretty easy. I just copy. I mean, we use copy-paste. That's the best tool for a developer. Okay, and let me see. I think I have something. Yeah, I also took the comment and also took the link, which I don't care about. Okay, so basically I just copy-pasted the code, right? And now I can save. And automatically when I save, it gets recompiled. And we can check to see how our site looks like now. I expected it to look like a little better, right? So we have the cards already, so just by copy-pasting. But the numbers here are not okay, right? It's always 10 and 15, always John Doe, always a not found photo, both on top and on bottom, and always nature and black, right? So we want to change this to be dynamic. So we just go here, and let's see. So here, for example, this is the link to the user's profile. So I replaced this static string with a dynamic expression, right? So this code that I just wrote here is JavaScript code, right? OC is a variable which is defined above. Okay, and the same also for the image. Okay, and this profile is basically something that I defined before, that it's a property of this control. Okay, let's see if we changed anything. So did anything change? mean, now we have profile photos, right? But the names and also the comments and the likes are still static. We don't like that, so we changed John Doe to the name, and here is the category. And the image itself. Let me check. So we have to see what's the name. URL is the name of the property. Okay. And here we can write, and if there are no comments, then to write 0. Oh, actually, I think those were the likes. Okay, let's check how it looks like now. Okay, better, but still not finished. So we have now everything apart from the image and also the category name or the category color. Yeah, I don't understand why the link is not working. Okay, and the category color. Basically, this is controlled through a CSS class. We can change it like this. So, okay. Let's check again. So now the colors are also okay, and to be honest, the image, so URL, get image. Okay. Yeah. So basically, that's it. The idea is that you can start from an existing HTML example. To be honest, right now it doesn't really, if you're not a designer, you'll not design a custom CSS framework, right? I don't think that it's worth the effort because it's a lot of work. So you can go to Bootstrap or whatever other UI framework, take the HTML from there, copy paste it, replace the static stuff with dynamic JavaScript expressions, and then you can build basically a website or a nice looking site very easily. So to be honest, this took me a day, not even a day. Because yeah, if you start from existing HTML, it's very easy to make it dynamic in UI5 if you use this extension. If you don't use JSX, then you have to concatenate a lot of strings and debug a lot because probably nothing will work. So it will take a while. Okay, and I think that is it. So for feedback, well, now we already looked at the feedback app, so only if you want, you can still leave feedback at this link or using this QR code. And if you want to follow me on social, on Twitter, and you can find this app on my GitHub. If you look there, there are several repositories, and one of them is this UI5 gallery application. And of course, on SAP, I sometimes write blogs just for the fun of it. Okay, questions? Ishti?
Yeah, you said that you need to transform this JSX code into JavaScript.
Yes.
Does it transform into JavaScript 5 or 6? Or
you can specify. So basically, this is determined. You can configure this. You need to have some kind of build set up. And let me check if it's here, I think. Yeah. So basically, this is the preset which tells you in what language to, or in what version to translate. This env is the latest one, which takes all the latest features and tries to transpile it in a way that it can work on most browsers, the ones which had at least 1%, I think. But there are other presets like ES6 to ES5, which allows you to write any ES6 constructs, and they transform it into ES5. You have to be careful, though, that this does not provide polyfills. So if, for example, you want to use a new function that is available on array objects, this will not know to do that. It only knows to work with new language constructs, like for example for or for arrow functions, those work. But polyfills, meaning new methods on objects, those you need to include a different library. Also from Bubble, but yeah, you cannot include that in libraries, for example, because then you pollute somehow the namespaces.
Okay, and these presets, let's say none of the presets actually suits your specific case. Can you create your own?
Yes, they are all open source and all contributed by the community. So anyway, Bubble there is no company behind Bubble. So Bubble is a community project, and you can create your own plugins, like I did with my plugin. And if a plugin is not enough, a plugin handles just a specific case. Like for example, my plugin handles JSX. But if you want to handle everything, basically, and to combine several plugins into one, then you can create your own preset. It's just a JavaScript file, and you have to respect some kind of interface. It's very easy. Any other questions? Okay.
Comment regarding jQuery in UI5. That's true for the moment, but they are working hard on removing jQuery from it.
Yeah, they are working hard since 2 years ago to remove jQuery from it. And the problem is that it's so embedded in the way that UI5 was built that they still have to do a lot of stuff to get it there, I think. So 1.5 years ago when I was on UI5 Con, they said that since half a year ago, back then, so 2 years ago, they started removing global and jQuery from UI5. So, and I know that they still have it, so.
The last UI5 Con they said it's just one remaining place where they need it.
Okay.
The rest is out of it.
Okay, so they still.
They are really working on it and not saying.
Yeah, sure.
Just to mention that.
Yeah, sure.
Getting rid of it.
Yeah, the problem is, in my view, the problem is that UI5 has a very slow evolution. So if we look at Angular, what it did in 2 years, and UI5 is struggling since 2 years ago to create a CLI that builds stuff. So if you watched what I did in the live coding, I started a development server. Right? I had to build it basically from parts because there is no development server for UI5. But for React and Angular, there is one. And they built it in a couple of weeks, and SAP is building it since 1.5 years ago, and it's still in alpha. So, yeah, I agree that they are not staying in the same place, but advancing, but very slow. I mean, the open source community is going very fast, and they are at a very slow pace advancing. Okay, any other questions or remarks?
What does your plugin do?
So my plugin basically is responsible for transforming between the JSX tags. So basically for transforming between this code that we just wrote, right? This HTML that is inside JavaScript, and it transforms it into this code. So this is exactly what we wrote. This is, and it also, Bubble has a pretty nice feature that it generates for you a map file. So this file, don't ask me what's in it, whatever. But the thing is that Chrome knows to load it. So then when you debug, you don't see the horrible JavaScript code that was compiled, but your original code. And when you debug, you actually don't have to see the compiled code. You see the code that you wrote, which you are familiar with, actually. Okay? Other questions?
Okay, so this is what I'm going to see in the debugger?
Yes, exactly this.
Okay, I can just place breakpoints and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do, this is how React, also Angular works. So Angular is written in TypeScript, React also with JSX. So you can see this, you can put breakpoints at these lines where you have expressions. So it's, yeah, it's pretty good browser support. Also, you can debug directly inside Visual Studio Code. Okay. Then, if no further questions, thanks. And okay. Then, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. So have a nice day.